Stout Printmakers. I'm going to record a video today on basic printing in black ink. This would be the type of printing you would do for the first project. This video is not to replace the in-person demo. The in-person demo is always the best thing, and it's a fairly long video. This is just a somewhat abbreviated in case you need a refresher or if you missed a class due to our COVID situation. So I'm just going to quickly explain what my setup is here. Your home setup can take up as little as I think about a foot of space. I've done it within. I've got about 3 feet here. I have my piece of plexiglass for rolling out my ink. I have my plate. I have my torn paper over here. And then I've got my water bottle and my dish soap with water and my paper towels for cleanup. You're going to need your ink. This is why your small containers are so important. You get ink from the lab that you can put into your small containers and take home. This is a small version of the Akua ink that we have in the lab. Make sure you label your colors. That becomes really important as we get into color later in the semester. I have a Baron, a palette knife for spreading out my ink. This style of palette knife is your best one. A brayer, and then I have my chisels up here just for some editing. We're going to do proofing today, a little bit of editing, and then I'll launch you into your regular printing. The first time you print a plate, it's always proofing. You always proof before you print. They're like your tests to kind of figure out what your design is looking like, but it also helps you test out colors, papers, different things like that. Over here in my paper area, I've got a lot of paper torn down already. My paper is the size of my plate. So my plate is 4 by 4 inches. My paper is exactly that. Slightly smaller than my edges so that it's a bleed print. It will go all the way to the edges. So I've got some examples that I've already printed up here. So for example, the bleed goes all the way to the edges and goes off a little bit. It visually looks a little bit better than to have an awkward kind of edge. So I've got my mulberry torn down. I also have some torn down pieces of just plain newsprint. That's newsprint off the roll that we have in the lab. You need 4 to 10 sheets of that at least for printing on. And then you'll need some additional for interleaving. Exactly how much you do really depends on how much printing you're going to do. In terms of this first project this is spring 2021, we're going to do an addition of 4. That means 4 identicals. Typically for small additions, you need to double your paper. And so 4, that would be 8. Because this is the first project, I'm going to actually have you triple the paper because you'll probably do more test prints than normal. And we're getting better at printing. So for this assignment, you'll do 12 pieces of 4-inch by 4-inch mulberry paper. And then I also have at the end here, I just have some construction paper, some kind of fun paper to print on because it's Valentine's Day. I thought that might be a neat idea. So first what you want to do is you want to take your Akua ink. This is a water-based ink. When I do my water-based demos in the lab, I talk to you a lot about the Akua ink, who developed it, and sort of the history of it and its properties. I'm going to keep that fairly abbreviated now, and when you're back in class I can talk to you about that. It's about the consistency of peanut butter, so it's pretty loose. And you need about the size of a quarter, maybe slightly larger. You can pull out a dab of it. Akua ink does not dry quickly. It's one of the advantages of it. It dries very, very slowly. Put that, hopefully you can see that. Dries very, very slowly. I'm going to just kind of work it, warm it up, move it around, make sure it's mixed well. If your Akua ink ever separates, kind of like peanut butter does, you just mix it up just like peanut butter. It's really, really easy. You can move it around on your palette. You'll see it moves really nicely. I'm just kind of warming it up a little bit. This is a holdover from oil-based ink. But I'm just moving it around, making sure it's okay, making sure I don't have anything funny in it. Again, that's more common with oil-based ink. You want to then take your brayer, and again, in the lab I talk a lot about the hardness of the brayer, the integrity of the brayer, the flatness of the brayer, the materials of the brayer. Here I'm just going to get you going so you can work quickly. Hopefully you can see this. I'll move this over. You want to take the width of the brayer and you want to load up your palette knife with ink and then draw a line. This is called a line. I like to draw about three lines. This is your pile of ink over here, and this will be where my slab is. So I'm just drawing out my lines, and then you take your brayer. Notice the brayer has a little built-in stand. I have a slightly different one from you all. It has a built-in stand. You always want to place it down on the stand. That's to help protect the brayer. Not as important in the less expensive brayers, but really important as we get into the kind of nicer, more expensive ones in the lab. And all you're going to do is just roll that ink out. You want to be careful when you get started because you don't want your slab to get really messy. I'm going to just give my roller a half turn, and that's going to change where I lay out my ink. And what I'm doing here is I'm trying to make an even slab of ink. You can go 90 degrees. When the slab's all one color, you can do that. Pay attention to the sound. You hear that sound? If your slab has any more ink than that, it's too thick. Your slab is either going to be thin or thick or just right. And we're going to go for a thin slab. This slab is just right. Now I want you to do a thin slab. I'm going to show you how to pull the ink off. You just scrape it over. And then we take the same amount of ink and we spread it out. And it's less ink on here. And the slab will get a little bit thinner. Now, if you're in the lab or you have a big piece of plexiglass, you can actually thin your slab out by widening it or lengthening it. I can't do that here because of my piece of plexiglass. Now, I want you to have a really thin slab, and it's because Akua ink is very easy to over ink. And remember how I mentioned that it doesn't dry quickly, which is a wonderful property when you're learning, but it dries through absorption. So it dries as it absorbs into the paper, which is really great, but it means that it's prone to over inking. And particularly when you're first learning Akua ink, it's really easy to over ink, and then your prints won't dry. I'll talk about typical drying time after I get printing. So I pulled off a bunch of the ink, and now my slab, I know you can't see it, but I can see through my slab a little bit and see to the table underneath. So I'm happier with that. Akua ink is very highly pigmented. It's a very dark ink, intense ink. I'm going to go ahead and clean this up. I like to keep my work surface really clean while I'm printing. And if you saw my home studio setup video, I talk about the surface, different things you can do. I'm ready to go ahead and ink up my plate. So this is my plate. A couple things to notice. My plate's slightly larger than yours. My plate is 4 by 4 inches. My plate is brown linoleum, not gray. It's a harder linoleum. It's actually really hard to carve, and it gives you nice detail. It also is a little bit harder to print. Okay, my paper fits well. I do a reminder. This is my good paper. This is my proofing paper. I'm going to first proof with my newsprint. Once I'm happy with how my newsprint is proofing, then I'll switch to my mulberry. My mulberry paper is more absorptive, and I first ink up exactly the same and see how that prints. It'll be slightly lighter, if that makes sense. I'm going to now just ink up my plate. You need to pay attention to your brayer pattern, how you're rolling it out. My brayer is too small for my plate. Your brayer is going to be big enough. That's probably why we're working on such a small plate. I'm going to just hold this up so you can see it. You'll begin to see your image. I'm really happy. This is inking up really, really nicely. Now I want you to under ink. So I'm actually going to roll just twice in both directions. If you have a small area, you'll get pretty good at just doing a small area, or I call it crop dusting, where you could come in and just hit a small area and then fly off. When you are adding ink to your brayer, it's called charging. I always charge my brayer before I put it down. This is just so that I always know that I've done that. I do it in all forms of printmaking. It's not as critical in relief. Relief is a wonderful form of printmaking, especially for learning first, because it's very forgiving for things like rolling. You can really see how much ink is on your plate here. If you look at it kind of from the edge, you'll see kind of an even coat. If you see any like raised edges, sometimes there will be a raised edge right around the edge. That means it's over inked. If it over inks, it's going to squirt into the sort of open areas of your print and not work so well, or it'll give you really fuzzy lines. The other variable is your paper and then how much you're pressing, okay? And they're all kind of connected. So if you have less ink, you might need to press harder. I'm going to lay down my paper. I like to lay relief paper down left to right. That seems to be the easiest for me. Now, if you have a second brayer, some of you have a second brayer, that's terrific. You can actually take that brayer and roll it across your plate. I don't have a second brayer. I'm not going to do that, but I am going to use my Baron. You can use anything for your Baron. This is the banana leaf Baron. I like to do a combination of some kind of small circles, and then I also push on the edges. You want to hold the paper, and small prints like what we're doing are tricky. The paper is going to want to shift around a little bit. Newsprint shifts around more than a printmaking paper because it's not as absorptive. It's a little bit of a slick surface. But newsprint overall prints really well. It just moves around because it's a small little plate and it's hard to hold. So I'm kind of following my key lines, and one of the great things about newsprint is you can actually see through the paper to see how you're printing, which is pretty great. Let's say you don't have a Baron. That's fine. You could use, I've got just a glass container. Glass Barons are wonderful. They're very expensive. But you can just use a jar or something like that. Just make sure it has a lot of pressure. Plastic ones don't seem to work. The surface you're printing on is also really important here. You usually want to print on like a hard table surface. If the surface has some give, it'll affect your impression. Most of our counters in the lab are pretty hard and work pretty well. I'm just printing on a piece of plywood. It's just the top of my table. That's pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and peel it up. If you want to check it, you can. Put your finger in the center and you can peel up the edge. Oh, that's printing pretty well. I'm happy with that. Pulling up the edge. It's almost printing too well. I didn't want it to print so well for you. This is my print. Very consistent black. I've got a couple little spots, something like this little spot is really the Baron. Same with this little spot. These marks out here are called pickup. They're your chisel marks, your carving marks. The edges are a little tough to get. I've got some areas where I have just a little bit too much ink. I've printed this now 4 times for the classes right up here. I'm going to be careful of that as I'm inking up. When you pull your prints, so this is a proof, you want to lay them out in order. And that's helpful because if you do have an issue and you want to identify what that is, it'll really help you by laying them out in order so that you don't have to remember, oh, the one over there is what I did first, and then I put one over there, and that I did that second. I just lay them out right in order. Also, it can help you make sure you're maintaining a consistent amount of ink, which is also really important. I'm going to do less of a charge there. And then I'm done. Now when you ink up the first time, there's no ink on the plate. The second time, there's a little bit of ink on the plate. It's not a lot, but it's a little bit. So you have to put a little bit less ink. This is really, really consistent. A lot of times the first time you print, it won't be consistent at the beginning. Your prints they'll almost look like there's some salt or something. It'll be kind of spotty. That's all okay. That's totally normal. I want it to be lighter as you begin and then slowly get darker. Oftentimes it takes 4 or 5 prints for it to kind of get darkened and you to get consistent pressure that is enough pressure. You can also lay your paper down, like lay the center down and then put the edges out. Either one works. Do whatever is comfortable for you. Now when you are hand printing, you're using the Baron, and patience is really, really important. Just relax and enjoy it. If you get kind of impatient, you don't print very well. So hand printing is a slow process. Again, a really important one, just so that you can have a home studio, but also just during these COVID times when you need to stay home for whatever reason, you can keep up with your schoolwork. So we'll be learning press printing on the next project. And when you're hand printing, the type of paper is really important. I talked about that in the demo this week. You need a lightweight paper. The Mulberry paper packs that I put on the supply list are the ones that we recommend, and the best fit. They're already cut down and they print really well. I'm gonna finish this second proof, and then I'm gonna jump quickly to the Mulberry paper so you can see that, and this demo won't be too long. So I usually find I'll go around my plate, I'll Baron my everything, and then a lot of times I'll come back and do a second press, and that'll help me get a better impression. Again, do what works for you. You're gonna find certain things that work better just for you. Again, I'm pretty happy with that impression. I definitely didn't do a great job with the edges over here, but I'm really happy with the clarity of my lines, the darkness of my lines. I think it all looks pretty good. You, as a beginning student, I would do 2 to 3 more of these if they were really good, really solid. It just gives you more practice to ink up. Everything on my plate. Lay that out. I'm going to now jump to my Mulberry paper. If you get ink on your hands, wash this off with dish soap really, really easily. One of the great things. This, the Akua ink is safe to use without ventilation. and without gloves. So you can wear gloves, but you don't have to. You'll see in the printmaking lab, I oftentimes wear gloves just because it's a little bit messy and I get ink on myself. At home, I don't so much. I've got my paper ready. Go ahead and roll out my slab. I'm going to charge my brayer. Now your brayer, every time it inks up a plate, there's ink coming off of it and a little bit of ink coming off your slab. So at some point you're going to need to lay more ink down, and all you do is load up a little bit, lay down a line. I'm not quite ready for that, but you want to be looking for that usually around the 4th or the 5th print. I'm not going to charge my roller this time. I've been really happy with the amount of ink on here, and I have a little bit less ink on here, but I just want to see how good of an impression I get with a little bit less ink. So my plate's all inked up. Go ahead and lay my paper down. And then I go about doing the Baron. Again, if you don't have a Baron, I have had people use spoons. Like a metal spoon works actually pretty well. Anything hard, all you're trying to do is push paper into the surface. So this is a little bit soft because plastic is kind of soft. It has some give, but the glass doesn't, especially thick glass. Nice Barons are so nice. Really trying to push hard here. Just be consistent. Don't forget to breathe. Some people kind of hold their breath. I'm guilty of that. Now, mulberry, you can also see through even more than the newsprint. You see how I can kind of see how it's printing? Another great reason to use mulberry. I'm going to go ahead and lift it off. Looking pretty good. I'm really, really happy with that. It's not as dark, you'll notice, which is good. Could be partly because I put a little bit less ink on there. I didn't charge my brayer. But it's also because the mulberry is a little bit thicker paper. It absorbs the paper. It's more absorptive. The fibers are designed for printmaking. I have just a little bit of fuzziness over here, which is partly because the paper just shifted a little bit, and that will happen to you. If you see that little bit of fuzziness, you want crispness in terms of what you're going to turn in. So this would still be one of my proofs, but I'm getting really close. I'm pretty happy with this. I'm going to go ahead and just add a tiny bit of ink to my slab. It's getting noticeably thinner. It sounds a little bit different, but I also can just see through it a little bit more. All of our slabs in the lab have white board behind them, so you can see through them really easily. So if you want to replicate that, you could just put a piece of white paper behind your piece of plexiglass. When you add more ink, you just need to really spread it out thinly. You really don't need a whole lot of ink on here. It's kind of surprising. You can start going a little bit faster as you feel ready. You'd be amazed at how good you're going to get at this. You'll get pretty quick. Just please err on the side of under inking. Lay my paper down. I can already tell that I have more ink on here. It is printing a lot darker can see it through the paper more. And I'm not really pressing any harder. Oh, nice and black, really good. I am so close. I just need to press harder on the heart, just a little bit harder here. I'm really happy with the crispness. Also, you'll notice these lines out here, that's pickup. That's our pickup. If you want more pickup, you just ink the pickup more. You'll get better and better with designing with pickup. It's one of the things we're going to work a lot on our next project. I'm pretty happy with these in terms of proofs. Again, I would do a little bit more as the beginner student, but I'm going to move things along for the demo. I'm going to clean my plate now. I've got just the plain water. The dish soap will break down the lino a little bit. Now, how much you all are printing, it would probably be fine. But I still have you just clean your plates with water. Yes, you can clean these in the sink. I wouldn't recommend it at home, even though this is safe to use in your kitchen in terms of the Akua ink. I just avoid it just as a general rule. So I use the spray bottle. The first time I clean the plate, I'm a little bit stronger handed, firm but gentle. And the second time I'm a little more gentle. I don't want to hurt my plate. I don't want to break off a piece. The plates are really pretty hardy, but you'll notice it's really, really nice when you're gentle. Your plate's called your matrix. It's the most important part of what you do. It's the repeatable part, and you have to take good care of it. So this is what my clean plate looks like, so that the ink gets pushed around and it stains it. On the back, you'll see the burlap. If you run this under water, your burlap is going to get more wet. Here I've just got a little bit on the edges. When that burlap dries, it's going to shrink slightly, and it's going to cause your plate to arch and warp. And so that's another reason why I use the water bottle, because it just introduces less water onto the burlap and I get less of a deformation. But if that happens to you, that's why. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to reach for my chisels, and I know exactly what I'm going to edit. I've got just my small U gouge here, and I'm actually pretty happy with this plate because I've edited it so many times this week. I'm going to just smooth out this tiny little spot to make this curve slightly smoother, and I might clean up some of the pickup as well. But overall, I'm quite happy with it. I've made some little adjustments here and there. You can take your white colored pencil and indicate those adjustments if you want. One thing to keep in mind is that your image is backwards, so it can be hard to keep track of it. It's easy to be working the wrong part of your plate. So all I'm doing is just cleaning up a little bit, and you'll see fresh lino come through, which is really nice. I've got little pieces of the lino chipping off. I think because I've printed it so much this week. I'm pretty happy with that now. I just did a little bit of editing on this curve. For example, this week, these little marks inside the wheels were filling in just a little bit, so I just opened them up a little bit more. I'm now going to start all over again and re-ink my plate. I'll do one more proof and then I'll start in on my printing. Again, charge your roller. pretty happy with that. That inking looks really, really good. Again, one of the great things about Relief is that you really see your plates. You can see that ink sitting right on there. In Relief printmaking, we are just pressing the top. We're not pressing the paper into the deep into the plate to pull up the image, and that's why we can hand baren. It's one of the only forms of printmaking you can just hand press, and that's why it's so great during COVID. When COVID started, you could also use the back of your chisels. I've had a lot of students do that too. These are great. You actually get a lot of leverage on them. When COVID started, I very quickly realized it might be smart to switch the labs over to water-based inks to print at home. And I immediately got this little thing of ink, and I started printing at home by hand printing to see if it was something we could implement into our classes. So I've been printing at home for almost a year, and I really, really enjoy it. I find it to be really relaxing. And I really appreciate that I can do this out of my house. I have my studio right by my kitchen, and so that it's water-based ink is really important because the smell is important. If someone's working on dinner or lunch, I can still be printing. I'm going to go over this with the hand baren. Just know that when you're printing with the hand baren, or with at home, you can work with whatever you've got. I have a friend that has done printmaking workshops like in third world countries, and he said they're using sticks, they're using whatever they can find in terms of materials. So you can really make do a lot more than you think. We have a lot of kind of fancy stuff in the lab, partly just because we just have so many people in the lab, it's so busy. And when you don't have the right tools, it usually just means it goes a little bit slower, but you can still get really great results. Oh, I'm so happy with this. Okay, go ahead and pull this up. This impression is nice and dark. I'm still not awesome at my edges. I've got to still work on that. That's one of the harder pieces. I'm ready to go ahead and start printing. I'm going to lay this down. This is my final proof. I'm really happy with this. They're in order. When I go ahead and stack them, I will stack them back in order. When I stack them, I'm going to interleave them. So this is where I put a piece of newsprint. This top print's going to be on top. I'll put a piece of newsprint in between each. These are my proofs. I can then keep them in a little sleeve, just a piece of newsprint folded over, label it. I want to leave this proof out because this is what I'm working towards for all my prints. This is just a reminder of what I'm doing. Your prints, typical dry time is 20 to 40 minutes if they're not over inked and they're on regular paper. Newsprint will dry quickly, but it's not as absorptive of as printmaking paper. 20 to 40 minutes is normal, and it'll be dry to the touch. It takes 24 hours to fully dry. Now, if your prints are over inked, which again I said is really, really easy to do, then it can be quite a bit longer. So a lot of times I will leave my prints out to dry 2 to 5 days even sometimes. You'll probably be quite a bit less. Once they're dry to the touch, you can stack them, interleave them with the newsprint, and then store them in your drawer or in a folder or something before you bring them back in. This is our first print. I don't want you to sign your print just yet. I want you to bring them in and I'll take a look at them, and then I will show you how to sign them. I'm going to go ahead and show you how to clean up. You already know how to clean up your plate. In terms of cleaning up your palette, it's really straightforward. You want to scrape your palette with your palette knife. In normal times, we do this actually with razor blades, but we didn't want to have you get razor blades on top of everything else. So we thought you could just use your palette knife. The Akua ink is pretty expensive. It's actually a lot more expensive than oil-based ink. And so you want to be as careful with it as you can. And you need to make this stuff last all semester too. So I'm spreading out my ink. This is called discharging my roller. So let's see, I'm going to try and put this to the side for you. Then I go ahead and scrape it again. And then open your Akua ink back up, scoop it up, and put it back in, just like peanut butter. Pretty happy with this. Now when I clean my slab and my brayer, make sure your lid's on tight because this stuff will dry out. I use both water and dish soap. I use the dish soap, let it sit there for a second, on the slab and the palette knife. But on the brayer, the dish soap will cause it to break down. It's not the end of the world if you accidentally spray it with the dish soap once or twice, but I wouldn't do it regularly. It'll eventually really damage your brayer. It just causes the rubber to break down. And so for the brayer, I just use the regular water. And I've had times where I just use the regular water exclusively. I don't even use the dish soap. Sometimes I just mix up my bottles. I don't realize I haven't been using dish soap. It just cleans up faster with the dish soap. Make sure you clean the edges. These are your personal brayers, so the better that you clean them, the longer they will last. Brayers will last a really long time, and basically until the rubber breaks down, which right now I don't really know what that is. They keep changing the rubbers, but they're now last quite a long time. I have brayers from when I was a little kid. And those speedball brayers work really, really great. I really love them because they're so versatile. They're really basic, really simple. So my brayer is really clean. If you're getting any ink off of it, it's not clean. And then I'm just going to clean this up and I'll be done. So minimal, really minimal impact in terms of messiness. It's possible to stay extremely clean depending on your constraints. You can also print outside. I know it's too cold right now, but when the weather gets nicer, you can just print in the shade. The ink will dry a little bit faster in the sun, but just go under a tree or something.